So today, guys, I wanted to revisit a video ranking all of the Fox 3 missiles, the BVR Fox 3, active radar homing missiles that we have in the game. So we have all the tiers over here. We have all the missiles over here. For the most part, of course, there are minor things like, for example, AIM-120As, the Bs, and the RB-99 are pretty much the same missile in the game. So I just decided to implement together. The RVV-AE and the R77 is pretty much the same. PL-12 and SD-10A pretty much the same, okay? But we're gonna rank all of these missiles, okay? We start off with the AM-4, guys, a missile that it's very similar in design, at least, to the later versions of the AIM-120. Actually has the clipped wings, right? But it's a missile that, although it can be good in the right hands, it's not the greatest missile ever. It's good for long range. It is one of the missiles that have the least amount of drag, so it can do very well in very long ranges. It doesn't have a lot of thrust, and it doesn't have a lot of turn. So it means that the missile, although it is probably the missile or one of the missiles that have the least amount of drag, it doesn't have the power output to push it to like exceeding ranges that the AIM-120 can do, right? If he had a proper engine, it would be a great missile, better than the AIM-120, but since it has its engine, it's not the greatest thing ever, okay? Here I have to put two missiles, the Darter and the Derby. They are very similar to each other, pretty much the same missile on the stats. There are slight changes between them, but they come from the same design, and they are very, very similar in the game, almost identical. It's very, very tiny margins we change. I would put them on a B tier because they are basically a jack of all trades. They turn better than some of the missiles that you see, like the AIM-120, AM-4 and stuff, but they also can do very good ranges. And I used to think that these missiles were better, and after playing more, after some changes that they did, I just decided to put them on a B tier. They are great missiles, just not as great as some of the other ones that we are going to talk about, because remember, guys, all of these missiles, they are pretty good. Some of them better, some of them worse, but with a very fine margin, more or less, okay? So yeah, the Darters and the Derbies, they're just missiles that are kind of a jack of all trades. Like I said, they are good at everything, but not great at everything. They lose on the turn to some, win against some. BVR, like very long range, win against some, lose against some. So it's kind of complicated, right? Then we go for the PL-12, the Chinese AIM-120 over here, because it looks like an AIM-120, right? So the PL-12 SD-10s, they are very interesting missiles. They are one of the best BVR missiles we have in the game, apart from some of the other ones. It is actually a very reliable missile. I want to put in an A tier because this is kind of an underestimated missile, okay? It's a missile that not a lot of people pay attention to, but it can be great. It has a good engine, a better engine than the AM-4, and the flight performance, the drag and everything is very similar to something like the AIM-120, right? So it's a very good missile, and it's very, very comparable to some of the others. I only put the Dart and Derby below it because normally they would have a worse performance in the longer ranges, okay? A slight better performance in the shorter ranges, a worse performance in the longer ranges. And in the shorter ranges, the PL-12 can still do good, and it's almost the same as the Derby and Darter, but tiny margins over here. Just remember, tiny margins. But overall, I like the PL-12 very much. Then we go for the new addition, the R77-1, a missile that everybody wants to see where it goes to. Honestly, guys, it is a hard missile to actually point to any place, but I gotta put in the S tier. Why is that? Because although it does have an enormous amount of drag, the engine kind of helps it out a little bit. Although it will have a better energy and a faster speed to get to the targets than all the other missiles, probably, most of them at least. It lacks a little bit on final speed to be able to do the final maneuvers to get the kill. So sometimes in the very long ranges, you will miss kills here that in an M120 you would get it. But apart from that, it's a very small difference, and everything else the R77 can do better than most of the missiles that we have in the game. So the R77-1 is just an amazing missile that really, you know, puts Russia on top again, while they were not on top for a while because of the R77, right? So it's a bit of a problematic missile, at the same time controversial, right? At the same time that it's a very, very well thought missile at the same time, right? And remember, you can carry a lot of these missiles with the platform of the Su-30, okay? Then we're gonna jump a little bit, ignore a little bit the Fakur and the Phoenixes. We're gonna go for the MICA. The MICA is a problematic missile to rate. Why is that? Because in the long range, it is a D tier. It's probably the worst missile you have. But in a specific platform, the Rafale, this missile just becomes an A. Why is that? Because it is technically, for the very, very short ranges, even better than the R77. But it's a very small range, like between like 0 to 5 kilometers, maybe a little bit more. The MICA will be better than the R77, but for the rest, it will be worse, just because it loses so much energy, you know. So it's not a very good missile for long-range PVR normally with the Mirage platform. But the Rafale, this thing actually becomes a very reliable PVR machine, because you can actually put this missile in a very high altitude launch, and because of that, it will do very well. So the MICA is actually pretty good in the Rafale. In the Mirage and stuff, it would be probably worse, just because you cannot put the missile in that window. But since you can with the Rafale, it is a great missile. You know, you can do very well, one of the best, if not the best, in the shorter ranges. And in the longer ranges, it is worse than some of the others, but the Rafale pushes to being almost equal. Then we have to talk about the R77. This missile is a bit problematic to put in here, you know. Again, it is a missile that is very good in a short range turn. I would probably put it in a D tier just to have something here, just because in a general sense, none of these missiles are actually bad, you know. All of them are pretty good. I just think that the R77 lacks the thing that MICA needed to be good, which is power to weight in the aircraft platform. So this aircraft actually suffers from not having a fast accelerating, fast climbing aircraft like the Rafale. If he had that, it would actually be closer to the top. Not as good as the MICA, but it would be closer to the top over here. Since he doesn't have that, it's being fired from MiG-29 SMTs and Su-27s, which are notoriously the worst close to top tier jets in the terms of acceleration and climb, compared to Eurofighters, the 15E, and some of the other aircraft even. The R-77 becomes a problematic missile because it has a very short burn time, very high drag, so for short ranges it is great, one of the best in the game as well. But for apart from like 10 kilometers or even less, it loses to every single other aircraft, and the platform doesn't help, okay? So I would probably here, just because I don't think D tier, I mean, all these air missiles are pretty good. It's just that they are problematic in their own way, you know? And then we go for the M120, the A, the B, and the RB99. I have to put it on the S tier. I still believe it is the most reliable missile of NATO, you know. It's a missile that has great thrust weight, great thrust in general, lower drag than most of the missiles that we've seen here, apart from maybe the EM4, but the engine on the EM4 doesn't help it. The platforms are variable over here. In an Eurofighter, this becomes better than the R77-1 just because of the platform for BVR. So it is one of the best missiles in the game, if not the best. It's a very close encounter between the two. I think if you forget about the platform, the R77-1 is a better missile. If you include the platform, they become a lot more closer, because the Su-30SM is a lot of it's a heavier aircraft. It takes its time accelerating and climbing, so it means that an Eurofighter with an F-15E with an AIM-120 can do the same as the Su-30SM with the R77-1, just because of the platform, okay? Apart from the platform, I still believe the R77 is better, but not by much as well. The AIM-120 is, I mean, all tiny margins over here, but it is one of the best missiles in the game. And then probably the most difficult ones for me to rate over here. They have different BRs, and it's completely different than these ones, but I would probably put the Fakur as in its tier. Of course, remember guys, I'm comparing in its tier, because if you put this aircraft in a top tier, they will suffer. But in its tier, it is a very good missile, maybe even an S tier over here. In its tier, the Fakur 90, because it is the fastest missile in the game probably, and it just gets people by surprise. It is very good, very powerful. In its BR, I have to reiterate this, in its BR, it is an S tier for sure. It is a great missile, one of the best in the game. And these two, they have tiny differences on the loft, you know, parameters and minor things, but they don't change too much, okay? The AIM-54 is indeed better, and on their BR, I think they can be an A tier. Okay, again, these are completely different aircraft because they missiles, because they have different BRs, right? The Fakur for sure at those BRs, 12 point something, 13.0, I mean 13 point something, 12 point something, depending on what you are fighting. The Fakur is the greatest missiles in those BR ranges. Of course, if he gets to a higher rank, it's fighting 13.7s or something, it will be like a B. Right, but in its rank, it is amazing, and the Phoenixes are pretty good on its BRs as well. Not as good as the Fakur, but they are pretty great missiles as well. Very long range, you need to use them in the long range, so no short range firing with these, because if you do that, you're gonna miss, and they're just great missiles. But remember guys, again, in its BRs, okay, completely different. Separate these two categories over here, because these are the first types of Fox 3s you see when grinding, right? And these are the top ranks, okay? So a bit different between the two, okay? But basically this is it. Let me know in the comments what is your favorite Fox 3 missile in the game. See you guys on the next one. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and bye guys, see ya.